She was born in an age that even time has tried to forget. She was the daughter of a noble family, but her greatest legacy was neither land nor title. It was only her face. She had hair shining like gold, icy eyes, and once she looked into those eyes, people felt a tremor inside. Was it admiration? Or was it fear? No one knew. Women would be jealous. Men would look down. The priests would turn their heads. And then the king saw her, walking through the dim stone corridors of the palace. One morning, their eyes met. Dozens of women had passed where the king stood, but this one was different. He chose the queen. Perhaps he thought he would glorify himself by having her, but there was one thing he forgot. Possessing fire is not controlling it. He was only 16 years old. She was brought to the palace overnight. The palace people found out in the morning that she was the new queen. In the first days, everyone was talking about her. Her clothes came from France. She bathes her skin with milk. His eyes were not real. They were opened by magic. These words started as a whisper. Then they became shouts. The queen was a woman without a smile. They saw her alone in the palace gardens. She didn't speak at meals. She didn't dance at balls. And this silence struck fear into the people. She was thought to be intelligent, observant, and dangerous, but no one asked. Maybe she was just unhappy, because the king wasn't interested in her. He just kept her as an ornament. The queen woke up every morning and looked in the same mirror. Am I a human being, or am I just a beautiful cage bird? The other women of the palace didn't like her, especially the king's former mistress, and perhaps it was that jealousy that sowed the seeds of the end. In time, rumors spread that the queen was a sorceress, that she read secret books at night, that she talked to black cats in the garden. Lies mixed with whispers, and the whispers pierced the palace walls and reached the king's ears. There was no longer any trust in the queen. The advisors met one night and decided, this woman is a threat. We must destroy her quietly, before she is publicly disgraced. But even her death had to be spectacular, because ostentation was the best weapon of the royal courts. And so, the bathtub was prepared, the story of a woman cursed with her beauty. But the real curse began now, because every whisper had turned into a nail, and those nails were slowly building her coffin. The first crime against the queen, witchcraft. There was no evidence, no witnesses, but there was no need, because a woman's voice was not worth a man's gaze at that time. There was no trial for her. No questions were asked. Only an order was written. The queen will be given a private death, silent, elegant, and irreversible. This death was not the executioner's axe, nor a poisoned drink. This death would come in the steam that would slowly rise in the bath. He would be killed in the place people trusted most, in his own home, in his own comfort. And so the plan began. The queen was informed that morning that it was bath time. She was clueless. She was even tired. It was as if she had sensed the approaching darkness. The servants were preparing her room. But today, instead of the usual soaps, there was pain hidden under rose petals. The bathtub was no ordinary bathtub. Beneath its gold-plated surface was a hidden hearth system made of copper. The bottom of the tub was fireproof, and underneath it, firewood had been carried in since the early hours of the morning. Every officer had his orders. No one asked questions, because the order came not from the king, but from fear. When the queen stepped into the tub, the water was only warm. She even liked it. She closed her eyes. The moment the steam touched her skin, she felt a brief peace. But it didn't last long. Something was wrong. The water was heating up faster than usual. When it touched his chest, his skin began to burn slightly. He frowned, but he still couldn't understand. Maybe a mistake, maybe a new soap, but in a few minutes, the water was no longer burning his skin, but the patience in his soul. He wanted to stand up, but her legs were numb. Seeing his reaction, the servants backed away. They didn't even make eye contact, because eye to eye was complicity. One servant seemed to want to approach the water, but the head servant looked only once. And in that look, there was only one sentence: don't interfere. Just look, When the queen let out her first scream, music started in the far rooms of the palace, because music drowns out screams, and the king said, "I don't want to hear screams." As the minutes passed, the water in the tub was no longer a bath, but a torture chamber. And then it scabbed, and then it crusted, and then it cracked. But the queen was still alive, because death wasn't waiting for her. Death was mocking her. One of the servants around the tub, a young girl, turned away, unable to hold back her tears. But suddenly, the queen's voice was heard. "You are killing me, but my soul will remain." At that moment, all the servants shuddered, because that word was not just a cry. It was a curse, and this curse was written on the ceiling of the room, along with the steam rising in the bathtub. Invisible but eternal, each bubble was like a tiny dagger striking her body. Each wave of steam was like an invisible poison entering her lungs. But the queen was still not dead, because this death should not be quick, but exemplary. They wanted to break her spirit, not her body. And in that moment, they succeeded. Time seemed to stop. There was no clock in the room, but minutes turned into centuries. Every cell in his skin was burning, one by one, but he felt every one of them, because the most horrible form of pain is the one that doesn't kill, but doesn't let go. The queen's voice was no more. She wasn't screaming. Someone who saw that moment wrote this. He had such an expression on his face, as if he was waiting for justice, not heaven. Those eyes were still at war. Some of the servants left the room. They couldn't stand it, but many stayed, because fear was stronger than conscience. The queen's skin cracked, her kneecaps peeled, the flesh on her shoulders blistered and blistered, but her eyes were still open. She was still standing, even in a bathtub. Over time, the pain began to sink into his soul. It was no longer a matter of the body burning. Memories were burning. The gardens he ran through with a smile as a child. The first days of the palace. The first time the king saw him. One by one, they were melting away. But in the meantime, there was something else going on inside. A curse that grew silently around the queen. With that vapor, an invisible darkness that permeates the walls, settles on the floor, gets in the hair of the servants. Because he wasn't just dying, it was transformed into an energy. One witness later said, that room became not a tomb, but a temple, and the temple was filled with rage. In the second hour of the execution, the queen's voice was heard again. But this time not to shout, but to whisper, "When you realize the water is boiling, it will be too late." This was not a threat, but a prophecy, because his suffering would not end only with his own death. It was a beginning, a chain that would eventually wrap around everyone who killed him. A chain of curses. And finally, the queen's head fell back. Her eyes were open, but her gaze was elsewhere, higher up, beyond, more infinite. But no, he still wasn't dead. The final stage of the execution had not yet begun, because the queen was not only being boiled alive, she was also being made to forget. And the most horrible death is not the death of the body, but the erasure of memories. The queen's eyes were still open, but now she saw nothing. The body was silent, but the soul cried out, because her death was not the end, but only the first sentence of a dark story. After the execution was complete, everyone in the room dispersed. The bathtub was emptied, but the vapor traces on the walls were not erased, because some traces cannot be seen, but they can be felt. The servants could not speak for a while. Some resigned after that day, others quietly disappeared. One person wrote months later, "No water temperature gave me peace after the bath." The king made no comment. The queen's name was erased from palace documents. Her portrait was removed. The room where she slept was closed. No one even entered that room for years. But no matter how much they tried to erase it, the silence was returning. And this silence was more threatening than ever. Exactly 1 week after the day the queen died, the first strange incident occurred in the palace. In the middle of the night, the smell of burning skin emanating from the bathtub room spread through the palace corridors. The door was locked. No one was inside, but the smell, it was there. Then the mirror broke. The old mirror that the queen looked into every morning. No one had touched it, but in the morning, The cracks were shaped like a human face. At night, some servants said they saw steam rising from the bathtub. One of them said the tub was empty, but it was full of a woman's breath. The palace was in a silent panic. No one spoke out loud, but everyone felt the same thing. She was still here. And then, one of the advisors who sent the queen to her death woke up one morning with a boiled frog in his room, right in the middle of his bed. Not in the water, not on the floor, on the pillow, not on the floor. It was a message, because the frog is a symbol of magic. On the pillow, a single boiled frog placed at the center of a ritual circle, and a boiled frog is the first spark of darkness. It was a message, because the frog is a symbol of magic, and a boiled frog is the first spark of darkness. In time, the curse spread. One by one, the planners of the execution fell ill. The king slowly went blind before their eyes. The doctors could find no explanation, but the people knew. He is not in the bathtub. Now he lives in the eyeballs. Years passed. A new queen came. New people moved into that room, but no one could sleep there, because every night, the faint sound of boiling water came through the walls. And one day, in the middle of the room, a sentence was found in the dust. No one had written it, but it was there. I haven't forgotten. You won't forget. This was not just a story of death. It was the story of man's greed for beauty, the betrayal of a woman's voice, and the silent return of justice.